Truth at last came crashing down like a storm. Christine never anticipated. The courtroom was hushed. Every eye, every whisper, every sound of paper rustling seemed to recede as Christine Brown moved into the spotlight. She gripped the edge of the witness stand so hard that her knuckles became white, her heart thumping in her ears like an insistent drum. It was colder than she could ever recall, yet the sun was shining brightly through the big windows of the courtroom. The room was charged with tension, and each person there was holding his breath, waiting for the time when the carefully built walls around Christine would come tumbling down. Christine had held her family together for years, in spite of cracks, secrets, and unspoken bitterness. She had smiled through endless dinners, concealed her agony during fights, and suffered periods of racking loneliness, but preserved the illusion of strength for all those around her. But today, all that didn't count. Today she was not behind masks or smiles. Today she was at the eye of a storm she had never expected, a family fight in court. It started with a straightforward envelope, harmless on initial observation, but full of consequence. The letter within was secret, one that was supposed to stay concealed, but somehow made its way into Christine's possession. She recalled the precise moment she had it in her hands, the paper shaking minimally in her hand, as she read through the words that would leave her world shattered. Each sentence threatened betrayal, but not one that could be brushed aside. This betrayal was personal. This betrayal was from the individuals she had trusted the most. Her husband Cody, the man she had spent decades with, the father of her children, the man with whom she had ridden out so many storms, was involved in things she hardly dared believe. And then there were the other wives, women she had thought were friends, allies, and companions. The letter intimated that some had worked against her, not because they were evil, but because they were following agendas that Christine could not have anticipated. Christine's thoughts whirled as she recalled all the early mornings she had awakened to prepare breakfast, all the late evenings she had lain awake fretting about the future of her children, all the holiday breaks she had spent painstakingly arranging for smiles and laughter. Was it all taken for granted? Had all her devotion, patience, sacrifices been shot down behind closed doors and secrets brewed in silence? The mere thought tightened her chest with a combination of grief and anger. With each step she took towards the courtroom, each movement felt heavier than the last. The floor seemed to shine with a polished sheen that reflected the overhead lights, like a mirror held up to a woman she no longer knew, a woman bracing for battle, a woman who had borne too much for far too long, and a woman compelled to finally confront the repercussions of truths long hidden. The judge, who was a stern but equitable man, peered over his glasses at Christine. His eyes flared with a glimmer of compassion, although the burden of the courtroom and the law compressed beneath him. "Mrs. Brown," he started, his tone steady but authoritative, "we would like to hear your version of things." Christine's throat parched. Words she had practiced so many times now seemed delicate paper in the breeze. How was she supposed to express the extent of betrayal, the innumerable nights spent silently weeping, the seconds she had kept herself intact in order to protect her children from sadness? It was not a matter of law, it was a fight for her dignity, her identity, for the very definition of who she was as a mother, a wife, a woman who had suffered more than most could ever imagine. She drew a deep, shaking breath, the burden of the courtroom weighing heavy on her shoulders. Her gaze swept the room, seeing familiar faces she could no longer trust completely. Cody sat facing her, his shoulders stiff, his expression revealing a combination of guilt and fear. He refused to meet her eyes, but she could sense the tension emanating from him like an electric charge. The other wives squirmed in their seats, their hushed words truncated by the icy protocol of the court. Even the kids sitting still in the gallery felt the seriousness of what was happening, their small faces creased with puzzlement and concern. Christine's mind wandered back to her early days with Cody, when life had been full of promise, love, and dreaming together. She had dreamt of a future of oneness, of respect for each other, and of harmonious family life. But at some point along the way, the image had broken. The smiles had turned guarded, the words cautious, and the relationship strained by decisions she did not approve of or comprehend. And now the secrets from that letter promised to shatter the fragile pieces of what was left. The letter had accusations, yes, but proof emails, bank statements, and personal letters that created a landscape Christine never wanted to behold. Every sentence reminded her that the family she worked hard to raise had been concealing cracks she could no longer turn a blind eye. Every transgression hurt, not only for her, but for the children whose innocence she worked hard to shield. Christine's hands trembled with a small jerk as she opened her mouth to say something. But the words flowed out even, clear, and with the vigor that had sustained her throughout years of unassuming perseverance. "Your Honor," she started, her tone resolute in spite of the quiver under it. "This is not just a matter of money or domestic chores. This is an issue of trust. This has to do with the safety and welfare of my children. And above all else, it has to do with respect that I merit as a mother and wife." She hesitated, throat catching on the lump as she worked to calm the tide of emotion that threatened to engulf her. Sleepless nights, hushed disagreements, and sacrifices galore paraded themselves in her mind. All she had ever done was out of love and a need to keep them safe. Yet here she was, accused before the very individuals whose validation she had ever after coveted more than anything else. Christine's gaze had crossed the courtroom with Cody's once, but he did not glance back. The tension between them was so thick it was deafening. A gorge wide with years of unspoken truths and unresolved pain. The judge nodded for her to continue, and she pushed on, telling the timeline of events up until the letter, the secrets exposed, and the ways in which it had devastated her and her children. Her voice grew louder with every sentence, propelled by a combination of righteous indignation and deep sorrow. She talked of middle-of-the-night pacing as her children slept, of avoided conversations with other wives in order to keep the peace, and of constant watchfulness necessary to keep her family from destroying itself. Each sentence struck a note of truth, and gradually the courtroom turned. Whispers disappeared, eyes were opened wide, and even the hardest-bitten commentators appeared to feel the extent of Christine's agony and strength. When she finished, there was a still racing heart but a flicker of relief. She had told her truth, exposed her pain, and reasserted some kind of control over a situation that had imperiled her. The hurricane had not blown over, yet she had remained strong at its center. And as she moved away from the witness stand, she knew that no matter what lay ahead, she had already gained something 1,000 times more valuable than the verdict. Her voice, her strength, and the unshakable love she held for her children. Life within the Brown family had always seemed picture-perfect to the world outside. Viewers had watched the show, observing laughter around the dinner table, smiling around holidays, and the infrequent heated argument that was soon forgotten. But within the walls of her home, Christine was aware of reality. Polygamy wasn't simply a way of living. It was a delicate balancing act, an emotional tightrope on which she had walked for years. Christine had always been a firm believer in leaving it all on the field. She devoted her heart, patience, and time to hold the family intact. She sacrificed in silence, giving up personal aspirations, putting off aspirations, and placing happiness after others. There were nights she was left sitting in the darkness alone, wondering if anyone would ever actually look beyond the surface and see the burden she bore. The children required stability. The household required peace, and Christine had been more than willing to suffer anything to bring it. But maintaining peace cost a price. The other wives also had their own things, their own cliques, and Christine frequently found herself in the middle, attempting to resolve arguments, calm damaged egos, and nip resentment into being. It wasn't simple. The slightest differences would spark tension, and Christine got the hang of biting tears, swallowing frustration, and containing emotions with precise care. She was an expert at looking calm as the hurricane raged in her. The courtroom sat at attention, as Christine recounted her inner battles, the sleepless nights spent worrying over the emotional welfare of her children, the unspoken arguments she tolerated to not disturb family peace, and the endless times she felt invisible, ungrateful, and not understood. "I spent years prioritizing everyone else," she confessed, her voice shaking a little, "and in so doing I sometimes forgot to take care of myself. But all the sacrifices were done for love. Love for my kids, love for the family, and yes, even love for the guy I wedded." She told of the early years of her marriage, when the thrill of polygamy was tempered by hope and togetherness. But with time, fissures started to appear. Choices were made without consultation. Discussions took place behind doors. Secrets were kept which gradually eroded her trust. Christine had attempted to address problems in a gentle, diplomatic manner, without causing tension, but too often she was stonewalled, silenced, or ignored. Her children, she confessed, were the center of her fight. Christine had seen how the complicated family life impacted them. The uncertainty in their eyes when they detected tension. The questions they didn't ask because they worried about making it worse. The weight of harboring secrets far too heavy for children. She had lain awake many nights, strategizing how to shield them from emotional hurt, even if it meant losing her own peace of mind. Fact is, Christine declared, breaking a little but getting stronger. I've been trying to keep this family intact for years. I have been the bridge between duty and heart, between loyalty and love. And now, here I am in court, feeling like that bridge has been rocked, like all my efforts have been doubted, and like my children's universe is about to fall apart. The courtroom audience stirred in their seats, feeling the raw candor of her words. Even the judge shifted forward slightly, recognizing the emotional richness behind Christine's testimony. She wasn't citing facts. She was conveying the burden of decades of responsibility, the strain of silent suffering, and the bravery of remaining composed in a world that frequently misjudged her. Christine remembered the little things that brought into perspective how much she bore on her own. Dinner nights cooking for the whole family while suppressing the pain in her heart. Arguments between her husband and the other wives on which days she had to mediate, taking the blame to minimize the fight. Holidays carefully coordinated, so that all the children, all the wives, and all the traditions were included. Her own wishes of no consequence. These memories, once a source of silent pride, now had a bittersweet tinge, as the courtroom made her realize that her efforts were not always seen, heard, or given in return. She also candidly discussed her own sense of loneliness. Even with people she loved and cherished, Christine felt as though she were alone much of the time. There were times she wished for someone to simply recognize her struggle, to tell her, "I see you, I appreciate you, I see your sacrifices." Instead, she had been judged, criticized, and misunderstood, an invisible burden borne quietly for the sake of family harmony. As she explained, Christine's story evoked an image of a woman of great inner strength and unshakable love. She was more than a wife trying to deal with the dealings of a polygamous family. She was a mother, a guardian, and a warrior who had silently battled inner struggles while maintaining attempts at dignity and stability for the people she loved most. The courtroom was moved by her words. The murmurs had ceased. People were coming to understand the magnitude of her fight, not only the legal nuances of the case, but also the emotional truth behind it. Christine had led a life of compromises, sacrifices, and silent endurance, and for the first time, she was permitted to speak freely of it. Christine stopped, her fingers wrapped around the railing of the witness stand. She gazed across the room at Cody and the other wives, and for an instant, vulnerability weakened her strength. "I have never wanted to hurt anyone," she whispered. "All I ever wanted was for my children to be safe, for our family to live, and for love to lead us. But love cannot thrive without truth. Love cannot survive without trust. And that, Your Honor, is why I stand before you today, struggling for the truth, struggling for my children, and struggling for the respect that has long been due." The quiet that followed was palpable. Christine had not only shared facts, but emotions bottled up and concealed behind smiles and accommodations. Each member of the courtroom sensed the gravity of her words, feeling the personal cost of years spent negotiating a family situation few comprehended. For Christine, it was both horrifying and freeing. She had spent so long denying her own pain, bottling up her emotions, and lugging the secrets around in order to maintain harmony. But now, in this courtroom, she could finally tell the truth without restraint. She could finally reveal the world the realities of her torment. And above all, she could now battle for her children, so they would never have to bear the same silence and suffering as she had endured for so many years. Christine was aware that the road ahead would not be simple. There would be conflicts, discoveries, and hard choices ahead. But in that instant she felt a spark of hope, a glimmer that honesty, courage, and love could lead her through even the darkest tempest. She had exposed her vulnerability, her strength, and her absolute dedication to her family. And that, she knew, was the beginning of justice, of healing, and of a future where her voice could no longer be silenced. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Every chair, every desk, every person seemed to hold their breath, as Christine Brown prepared to face accusations she had never imagined. The room wasn't just a legal space. It was a battlefield of emotions, memories, and deeply buried family conflicts finally coming to light. Christine had spent years living the fine line of her polygamous family. She had kept her anger inside, swallowed her bitterness, and always put peace first. Peace was a distant memory in that courtroom, though. Every hushed rumor, every betrayal suggested in that confidential letter, now cried out for answers. And answers were what the other members of her family were hell-bent on getting. The first witness presented against her was another of the wives. Her voice shook with a small tremble as she answered, but the words themselves were biting and intentional. Christine has always been controlling, distant, unwilling to compromise when it mattered most. The courtroom gasped. Christine felt a pang of hurt in her chest, not for herself, but for the children sitting calmly, observing the tension unraveling before them. Hurt and anger welled up inside her like a tide. She needed to scream, to protest at once, but she was aware that losing control would spoil all that she had battled for. She breathed deeply, focusing, and let the memories direct her words. This was not a fight. It was her opportunity to correct the record, to lay bare the truth behind the deception that had been so grossly distorted for so long. "Don't you see?" Christine started, her tone firm but edged with emotion. "I have always done what was best for my children. Every choice I ever made, every fight I endured, every compromise I made, it was all to keep this family intact. I bore the burden of peace on my shoulders, sometimes silently, so others would not fear or live in anarchy. And yet here I am, standing accused of being the very source of the suffering which I attempted to avert." Her testimony rang out in the courtroom. Hushed whispers ceased, and even the judge sat forward, hearing the unvarnished truth flowing from her. Christine described sleepless nights, fearing what would become of her children, and days placating quarrels between Cody and the other wives. She broke open the emotional labor she had performed in silence. Holidays carefully coordinated, meals lovingly prepared, and sacrifices made, without gratitude or appreciation. But Christine didn't stop there. She faced the bitter reality about her husband Cody. She talked of decisions being made without her input, of broken promises, of trust being pushed to limits she never could have imagined. Her voice quivered at times, tears welling in her eyes, but the steely resolve in her words never faltered. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer silent. Cody shifted restlessly in his seat, not looking at her. For the first time, the court witnessed him not as the assured patriarch typically depicted on television, but rather as a man faced with the ramifications of his decisions, compelled to confront the emotional effects they had caused the woman who had remained by his side for decades. Christine's children sat silently in the gallery, feeling the weight of the moment but not yet grasping its significance. And yet, they were addressed by her words, almost as much as the court. She wished them to understand that their mother was not powerless, that she had struggled and would keep on struggling for their protection, their happiness, and their welfare. And then there was the worst of the confrontation. The other wives started sharing intimate moments, moments Christine had guarded with her life, moments that they now distorted to tarnish her image. Every accusation pierced deeper than the last, pushing Christine's self-control to its limits. But rather than shattering, she found strength in recollections of resilience. She remembered the sacrifices, the long nights, the tears shed in silence, and the countless times she had prioritized others over herself. "This isn't just about who is right or wrong," Christine said, her voice steady but fierce. "This is about truth, about the reality of what I've endured, about the love I've given, and about the family I've tried to protect. I never looked for fame, never looked for fame. I looked for harmony. And if harmony was accommodating criticism, shouldering the blame, and being misjudged, then I willingly carried that weight. But I will not stand here and let lies and half-lies determine who I am to my children, my family or the world. Her statements were in the room like a lightning bolt, affecting and inescapable. The courtroom fell silent again, but this time in wonder, as the force of her words weighed over each person in the room. Christine had not only vindicated herself, she had exposed the deep emotional cost of living behind doors in a polygamous household, the isolation of giving up, and the strength of a woman who would fight to defend the people she loved. The judge nodded slowly, recognizing the bravery involved in being so frank in the face of opposition. He was able to see, beyond the technicalities and the charges, the human narrative, a tale of love, perseverance and the quest for justice. Christine paused, gathering herself, wiping away the tears that had slipped through her efforts to hold them back. She scanned the room for the last time, her eyes focusing on Cody. No rage now, just clarity. She had told her truth. She had revealed the depths of misunderstanding, betrayal and unspoken struggle that had long characterized her existence. And as the courtroom whispered softly, taking in the ferocity of the battle, Christine experienced a curious blend of relief and fatigue. She had stood up to the charges, ridden out the emotional maelstrom, and come out not only unbroken, but also fortified. The battle was not yet won. There would be refutations, cross-questionings, and further revelations ahead. But Christine had laid the groundwork. She had established that behind the serene facade was a woman of great courage and unshakable commitment, a woman who would not be defined by lies, nor lost in betrayal, after 4 decades of love and selflessness. At that moment, Christine Brown was no longer just a mother or a wife entangled in family scandal. She was a symbol of strength, an emblem of emotional toughness, and a living proof that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, must always be told. The courtroom was at a fever pitch. Each whispered rumor had been still, and every eye was turned on Christine Brown, as she waited to be presented with the proof that would exonerate her, or continue to rock the shaky foundation of her family. The tension was nearly unbearable. It wasn't a legal fight any longer. It was a crash of years of unspoken truths, betrayals and secrets. The judge summoned the next witness, and in a stack of files was carried forward letters, emails and financial statements, each carefully scrutinized, laid bare the manipulations and concealed agendas that had been working in secret behind closed doors. The courtroom gasped when the evidence started to uncover the complete picture. Decisions taken without her knowledge, coalitions forged in secret, and choices that risked upsetting the stability of her entire family. Christine's heart pounded. Her fingers quivered a little, but she steeled herself to remain calm. For years she had suffered in silence, shielding her children and preserving the facade of familial harmony. Now at last, the truth was breaking out, and it was bitter, agonizing, and impossible to deny. The most stunning revelation was in the form of a letter from one of the other wives, admitting to things Christine had long suspected, but never had evidence of. The words on paper were terrifying. Secret deals, manipulations and decisions made that impacted not just Christine, but the children she loved more than anything. Her throat closed up, and for an instant felt as if the ground had disappeared under her feet. Cody's demeanor changed from defensive to guardedly offended as the facts mounted. His voice trembled when he attempted to defend, but the courtroom had already witnessed the truth. Christine not only silently suffered the betrayal, but she also went on to take care of the family, looked out for the children, and held on to her integrity as others schemed behind her. "This is not only about me," Christine replied, her voice shaking but firm. "It is about every decision made in the shadows, every manipulation, and every lie that had the potential to destroy this family. I have been loyal, I have been patient, and I have given up more than anyone could ever imagine to preserve our family. And now the truth is finally being revealed." Tears ran down her face, but there was also relief. Relief that after all those years of silence, the truth was not debatable. The proof vindicated her years of struggle, her sacrifices and her unshakable devotion to her children. The judge nodded gravely,
registering the emotional impact of what had been disclosed. Christine's children gazed with their eyes wide open. They had always known their mother to be strong, but now they could witness the complete depth of her courage and strength. The pain she had suffered, the fights she had waged in silence, and the loyalty she had served in the midst of betrayal. It all became tangible to them in that courtroom. As the testimony was read out loud, the other members of the family displayed shock, guilt, and remorse on their faces. The murmurs of conspiracy, the subtle manipulations, and the concealed truths could no longer be denied. Christine had stood at the eye of the storm and refused to break. She had met every accusation with integrity, every betrayal with dignity, and every discovery with grace. The climax came to its point when the judge spoke to the family, his voice stern but sympathetic. This court has witnessed evidence that cannot be dismissed. The truth, though difficult, has been brought to light. Mrs. Brown has demonstrated remarkable strength and determination in the face of dishonesty and adversity. Christine experienced a wave of vindication wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt heard, understood, and respected, not merely by law, but by all who had doubted her. The tempest of emotion that had tormented her finally began to subside, replaced by a clarity and determination. She addressed Cody, her eyes unwavering. "I have always been in love with this family," she whispered firmly. "But love cannot thrive in the shadows of deceit. We need to confront the truth, no matter how ugly, to safeguard what is truly important, our children and the honesty of our family." The courtroom was hushed, waiting for her every word. Christine's inner strength was unshakable, her determination inspiring. She had not only weathered the ordeal, she had triumphed over it, demonstrating that the strength of truth and courage could conquer even the greatest betrayals. As the day was closing in, Christine experienced a sense of exhaustion, but also of relief. The disclosures had been brutal, the emotional strain enormous, but at last she could perceive a glimmer of hope. The truth was revealed, the deceptions unraveled, and she stood stronger than ever before. At that point, Christine Brown was more than a mother, wife, or family drama contestant. She was a truth warrior, a testament to the resilient, and living proof of how it takes strength to face betrayal, guard loved ones, and maintain courage in the midst of impossible emotional battles. The summit of the battle in the courtroom was behind them, but Christine was aware that this was merely the start of a new episode, one where truthfulness, braveness, and love would lead her family to healing, redemption, and a future in which trust could be established once more. The gavel came down, ringing out in the courtroom like a beat of finality. Christine Brown let out a shuddering, long breath, feeling years of anguish, hardship, and emotional stamina finally lifting lightly. The fight had been long, agonizing, and sometimes almost unendurable. But here, now, Christine could sense a spark of hope, a flicker that justice, emotional as well as legal, was at last within reach. She glanced about the courtroom, her eyes settling on her children. They sat in silence, their faces a blend of wonder, relief, and guarded hope. For years they had seen their mother quietly absorb tension, jealousy, and strife in the family without comment. But today, with her bravery and unshakable adherence to truth, they saw the entire extent of the woman who had shielded them through every storm. Christine had struggled not only for herself, but for her children's future, their emotional well-being, their definition of loyalty, and their entitlement to grow up in a world based on integrity. The court had acknowledged her sacrifices, and for the first time she was rewarded publicly for them. It was not only in the legal arena, it was a win in the heart. Her eyes moved to Cody, who would not look at her. Their history was complicated, a lifetime of shared moments, love, disappointment, and misunderstanding. But at this moment, Christine felt a quiet strength. She did not need his approval or anybody's approval anymore. She had stood up for herself, told the truth, and shown that strength could be found in even the most hurtful betrayals. The other wives sat in silence, regretting and disbelieving. They could no longer ignore the fact of Christine's uncompromising commitment, nor the emotional price that she had paid for the sake of family harmony. The falsehoods of misunderstanding, manipulation, and deception had been stripped away, and the substance of a woman who had struggled so strongly for love, loyalty, and the well-being of her children was revealed.
Christine emerged from the courtroom, following the hearing, sunlight touching her face as a sign of newness. For the first time in years, she felt clear, a deep realization that the way ahead, though not clear, was hers to shape. She embraced her children tightly, feeling their body heat and trust permeate her fatigued heart. This was more than a legal win. It was an emotional rebirth, a moment that was the start of a new chapter. She thought about all that she had suffered. The sleepless nights, the silent tears cried alone, the sacrifices made so that her children would not be burdened with family strife. All of it had brought her to this place, this restoration of her voice, her dignity, and her power. Christine understood now that real strength was not merely enduring adversity, but facing it with courage, honesty, and unshakable love. I might have been tried, she whispered to herself, smiling softly yet firmly at her children. I might have endured betrayal, miscommunication, and heartbreak. But I am not broken. I am stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to guard my family and steer them toward a future constructed of truth. Her children, feeling the change in their mother's energy, extended their hands to hold hers, their tiny but willing gestures affirming the truth of what she had done. They had witnessed her courage in person and would carry it with them, knowing that resilience, honesty, and love could conquer even the darkest test. Christine also experienced a feeling of redemption, not only in the court's eyes, but in hers as well. She had weathered the tempest of betrayal and confrontation without compromise. She had confronted the hurtful realities of family relationships and come out not only unscarred, but strong. Her voice had been silenced for years by secrets and compromise, but now it was clear, firm, and irrefutable. As the family emerged from the courthouse, the sun was overhead, and it cast a warm light on Christine and her children. It seemed symbolic, a sign of the new chapter in their lives that was to come. While there would still be difficulties on the road ahead, Christine had regained control of her story. She had demonstrated that love and bravery were not passive. They were active, intentional, and sometimes fought for. There, surrounded by her children, Christine Brown knew something deep inside. Strength does not lie in avoiding troubles, but rather enduring them with unshakable determination. Redemption is not about forgetting errors or pain of the past. It is about rising above them, leading loved ones out of darkness, and opting for honesty and integrity over everything. I'll keep fighting for them, Christine whispered, her voice heavy with determination and with a kind of tenderness. For my children, for me, and for the future we all deserve. And that's when Christine Brown emerged out into the sunlight, leaving the courtroom behind, but taking with her the strength, courage, and redemption that no secret, no betrayal, no hardship could ever erase.